welcome back to the Cozy Thoughts podcast. My name is Nancy.
And I'm Jeanette.
Happy 2025! I can't believe it's a new year.
We say that every year.
I hope 2025 has started well for you all. I know a lot has been going on. But yeah, I just hope you guys are all doing well.
And if you guys have, or probably haven't noticed, but we did take a little break. We wanted to just see how we wanted to go about the podcast. It was becoming a little bit difficult to come up with topics to talk about and things like that. And so we kind of wanted a more streamlined process as well. And so we thought, why not recap movies and books? Like, we already spent so much time watching and reading that we might as well make
content out of it.
Make content about it and talk about it and share our perspectives. And there's also so many movies and books out there that you'll probably find out about one that you've never heard of from us.
Yeah, we hope you guys will enjoy this new revamp of the podcast, and let's get recapping. The most recent movie we watched is on Amazon Prime, and it's called Last Straw. And the movie starts off with a distraught man making a phone call to 911 about a crime scene that happened at work. As we're hearing this call, we see the camera panning around this empty diner, but we're seeing dead bodies. The guy mentions that his name is Jake Collins. The next scene takes place 24 hours earlier, and we're introduced to our main character, Nancy. That's very uncanny because my name is also Nancy. She is out in a field and she is looking at a pregnancy test, and she's just like looking at it for a while, and then she just tosses it onto the floor. And then she drives off to meet her friend Tabitha. They're having a conversation in her car, and we find out that Nancy is pregnant. She doesn't know what to do about it, and we don't know who the father is. Her friend asked her if her dad knows about this, and she says no, and quote, "He'd kill me before I kill it." Tabitha just congratulates her nonchalantly.
Afterwards, we see Nancy changing into her work uniform as she's driving on this dirt country road, and then all of a sudden her car dies, and so she has no choice but to walk. As she's walking, one of her co-workers, Bobby, catches up to her, and he's riding his bike. She asks if he can give her a lift because she's already late, and so he does. And so they finally make it to their workplace, and it's a diner, and we find out that her dad is actually the owner and that she is actually a manager. Her dad reprimands her for being late, and he notices that she's sweaty and asks her why. She tells him that her car died, and we actually find out that it's her mom's car. Her dad is stressed about having to shell out money for it, and he suggests maybe it's time to let it go. She just stares at him blankly and doesn't respond. The dad just quickly changes the subject and tells her that she doesn't need her car anyway, since she's going to be working the overnight shift with one of her other coworkers, Jake. She tells him that she has a graduation party to go to, but he stands firm in his decision, and he contemplates why she still hangs out with teenagers or high schoolers, even though she has already graduated like a year ago. She tells him that she thinks Jake is a freak, and he just says no, Jake is actually a trusted employee, and that she's just making a big deal out of it. Then she asks where her dad will be, and he just simply tells her he has plans. She walks off back into the dining area to start working. She's cleaning a table, and while she's cleaning, she sees this plate of unfinished food, which triggers her morning sickness. She runs out to the back to throw up outside, and Jake is actually outside smoking and witnesses this. He asks if she ate something bad, but she just tells him to go away, and then after a moment of silence, he questions if she's pregnant. But before she's able to answer, her dad also comes outside, and he sees the vomit all on the ground. Jake quickly covers for her, saying that it was the bad meat he left out. And before her dad leaves, Jake tells him to have fun on his big date, and this is where we and Nancy finds out that he's actually going to meet up with a woman. Nancy is upset at this news, so she just goes back inside, and Jake feels bad for exposing her dad, and then we see him take some medication.
Her dad leaves and everyone goes back to work, and we see Petey, who happens to be Jake's brother, cleaning up a table and he accidentally spilled some liquid on the floor. He tells Nancy, who happens to be sitting near, that he'll clean it up, and she acknowledges it. As Nancy's sitting there doing her work, she hears some commotion outside of the diner. She looks out and sees 4 teenagers messing around outside. She goes outside to confront the kids and they tosses her a dead animal. She cusses them out, tells them to go away, and she goes back into the diner. As she's walking in, she slips on the liquid that Petey spilled earlier. She screams at Petey, tells him to clean it up, which causes Jake to be mad because Petey is his brother. We can also see that Petey has Down syndrome, which is why Jake is overprotective. The teenagers comes into the diner. We see them wearing these creepy looking masks. They wanted to order, but Nancy is not having it. She tells them that she's going to call 911 if they don't leave, and so she goes over to the landline and pretends to call 911. This freaks them out, and before they leave, one of them actually threatens her that they'll come back. After the teenagers leave, this kickstarts an argument with Jake's and the rest of the coworkers. Jake tells Nancy that she is not qualified to run the place. Nancy is already pissed off the entire day, so this leads her to firing Jake on the spot. He tells her she cannot fire him because he is a legacy at this diner. We find out that his mom is actually the first person that the diner hired. Nancy stands firm on her decision and tells him to leave. He tells her that Petey is his bride. She tells him to wait outside until Petey finishes his shift. Bobby asks who is going to work the overnight shift with her, and she says she'll do it alone.
She then goes into the bathroom to just refresh and reaffirm that she made the right decision in firing Jake. Bobby tries to check up on her, but she snaps at him and just wants him to leave her alone. She then goes outside to toss out the dead animal that the teenagers had actually brought in earlier, and she sees Jake waiting in the truck in the parking lot outside. They make eye contact, but she just turns away and goes back inside.
It's finally time for everyone to go home, and that leaves Nancy alone at the diner. As she's finishing up her work, she goes and calls her dad and sarcastically asks if she interrupted anything. He said no, and Nancy tells him that he does not have to hide anything from her. He tells her he just does not want her to feel comfortable about his dating life. He tells her that he still loves her mom, but she just avoids the topic and tells him that she actually fired Jake. This frustrates her dad and said he'll deal with this later. She then asked her dad if she still has to stay back, and he said yes, because the lights outside are actually on a timer and someone will need to stay until the timer shuts off. She then begrudgingly hangs up. After that, she goes to the jukebox and starts playing some music, and she starts having a little dance session around the diner. And then we get a long scene of her just dancing to the music, and then she stops and then vomits on the floor. Then we see her cleaning her vomit, and then suddenly we hear a bang outside. She looks around and then she sees mopeds outside, and those were the same mopeds that the teenagers from earlier were riding.
So it seems like they're back.
Yeah. She calls out on the outside speaker that she'll call the police again if they don't leave. All of a sudden she hears banging, like multiple bangings outside the diner. This freaks her out. She goes to the landline and actually calls 911, this time reaching a dispatcher. She tells them what's going on, and they tell her that all the units are currently busy right now, but they'll stay on the line with her just so she's safe. However, the line suddenly cuts off.
She then just looks around trying to decide what to do, and then she turns and sees there's a face at the window, and she screams, and she is not having any of this anymore. So she just runs to the back to get her things, and she actually sees the same poor dead animal now laying on the counter inside. She angrily calls them disgusting freaks, and she exits the kitchen. She sees a figure has made it into the diner, but they're a little bit across the room. She grabs a little knife and stuffs it in her apron pocket and tries to dig around her backpack to find her phone, and we see behind her that someone is approaching her, but before they can get to her, we then hear a police siren signaling that help is finally here. She goes to the front and unlocks the door for the police officer. We find out that he's the sheriff. He tells her to calm down, but he doesn't seem too concerned. She wants to leave right now, but he still wants to assess the diner. He then tells her to make a cup of coffee, and she's like, are you effing kidding me? And also, me too. That would be me, because this is not urgent,
sir.
But she still goes and does so, and he actually goes outside to look around as well. As he's looking around outside, he notices that there's water running from a hose. He goes to turn it off, and then he goes to his police car to report to his unit that he'll actually stay a little bit longer. This might be related to the scene that he just came from.
The sheriff goes back inside the diner and Nancy pours him a cup of coffee. As this is happening, he asks her for a statement. She's frustrated and tells him that she's been terrorized by these teenagers that came earlier to the diner. She mentions that they ride mopeds or something, and that surprises him. He quickly grabs her and they start going out to his police car. She's confused about what's going on. She's asking him questions, and he stops her and tells her that he just came back from one of the most brutal crime scenes he's ever seen, and that the attackers rode mopeds. Suddenly, we see a bright light shine from afar along with the sound of an engine. This surprised Nancy and the sheriff, and he tells Nancy to run. And as she's running off to a nearby garage, the sheriff gets attacked by a masked man from behind. Nancy goes into the garage and witnesses the sheriff gets unalived by the masked man. She's afraid. She grabs onto her little knife that she put in her apron earlier. And as she's looking around, she sees another masked man walking around the garage. After the masked man passed by, we suddenly see Bobby walking up to the diner with his bike. She cursed to herself, wondering what he's doing there, and decides to run out to him. She reaches Bobby and asks him what he's doing here. He tells her that he wants to apologize for what happened earlier, but she drags him inside the diner and sit under a kitchen counter. And she asks Bobby for his phone. She calls her dad, but it goes straight to voicemail. They hear someone enter the diner and they run into the back. She gives Bobby back his phone because it's locked, and she looks around to see if the coast is clear. He hands her back his phone, but he accidentally hits a cup when he was handing his phone to her, and this blows their cover, and Bobby goes out to distract them while Nancy goes and hides into a cupboard. The cupboard does not close all the way, so we see that there's a crack. She then texts her friend Tabitha to come over to the diner to help. At first, she thought it was Bobby, but Nancy clarifies that it's her and to hurry. And when she looks up from the phone, we see the masked man looking at her from the crack, and he grabs her and takes her out.
Both Nancy and Bobby are caught, and they are now being forcefully held against the bar counter, getting their wrists taped. Then one of the masked men forcefully holds both Bobby and Nancy's heads and forces them to kiss. This makes Nancy mad, and so she pushes back against the masked men, and this makes the masked man mad, and so he drags her back into the kitchen and throws her onto the floor. He starts sniffing her, and she manages to free herself from the tape and stabs him in the ankle with her knife. She then runs out into the back, and another masked man appears behind her. She stabs that man, and he takes off his mask, revealing himself to be Petey. She backs up, shocked to see him, as the other masked men and Bobby run out to where they are. One of them starts calling for Petey, and we can assume that's Jake. Nancy is shocked and angered by this revelation that all this time she was being terrorized by her own co-workers and actually not the teenagers. We then get a flashback as to how this all came to be. We go back to the scene where Nancy is firing Jake. Jake tells her that he needs a job and that he has bills to pay, insurance, and he apologizes and tells her that he won't talk back to her again, but Nancy still stands firm in her decision in firing him. He then angrily leaves the diner and kicks over a trash can outside. We then see him in his truck calling his pharmacy, trying to refill one of his prescriptions, but it seems like he's having issues due to his insurance and lack of money.
We see when the others are done with their shifts, they gather outside and make plans to go get drunk and talk smack about Nancy. Jake and Petey leaves in their truck to go meet up with a drug dealer. Jake and Petey are sitting inside their truck and we see the drug dealer come up to the window asking for payment. Jake tells the drug dealer that he'll pay him next time, and he opens up his glove compartment and we see a gun in there. That spooked the drug dealer and he just tosses the drugs into the truck. Jake and Petey leaves and Jake proceeds to do the drugs while ranting about how he had plans to run the diner. It's dark now and they see the group of teenagers from earlier. Jake and Petey stops their truck and goes out to talk to them. They're just having a conversation until one of them made fun of Petey and that made Jake mad. He then goes and tells them that they're the reason he lost his job today. Jake then stabs the teenager closest to him. The rest of the teenagers started shouting, visibly scared. Jake pulls out the gun and hands it to Petey. We see that Petey is also scared about what's going on, but Jake forces the gun into his hands. The teenagers are begging for their lives as we see Jake goes to the truck and turns on the radio louder. He starts telling the teenagers to dance, and they just go along with it. They start dancing and Jake is taunting them, making fun of them. One of the teenagers is fed up and tells Jake to leave them alone. This makes Jake really mad and he tells Petey to shoot them. Petey, of course, does not want to shoot them, but Jake keeps telling Petey that he needs to stand up for himself and that they were making fun of him earlier. Petey still refuses and he grabs the gun from Petey and he tries to shoot at one of the teenagers, but there are no more bullets left. He then tackles one of the teenagers as the camera pans away. After that, we see Jake and Petey sitting in their truck, bloody. Jake tells Petey to stop crying and to get out of the truck. He throws one of the masks that he took from the teenagers and tells Petey to meet him at the diner. He then drives off as we see Petey run to the diner.
In the next scene, we see Bobby and Coop, another one of the co-workers, sitting around and talking about Nancy. Bobby is telling him about how he likes Nancy and how they have slept together, but Nancy doesn't return his feelings. Coop tells him to just move on or to make her jealous by sleeping with her friends or her mom, which heck. And here is where we find out that her mom is actually no longer alive. Jake then comes up behind them and scares them. He also shows them the mopeds that he had took from the teenagers. Simultaneously, Petey finally reaches the diner and he sees blood all over his arm, and so he goes to the hose to wash it off. The others then finally make it to the diner as well and meet up with Petey, and they plan to just freak Nancy out a little bit. This is when they start pounding on the walls of the diner from outside and Nancy threatens to call the police. This freaks Bobby out and he wants to back out, but Jake is just calling her bluff because she had pretended to call the police last time. But she is alone and by herself, and I think she is really going to call the police, sir. Then the next scene shows that they are now hiding as the sheriff is looking around. Jake tells Coop to go with Petey and take the mopeds around to the other side of the diner. Coop doesn't really want to, but he reluctantly does so. As he and Petey are walking together, Petey takes off his mask and Coop sees that there is blood on his face. This is also the scene where Nancy and the sheriff are outside talking at his police car, and Coop sees Jake sneaking behind the cop car. He then turns on the light and the engine of his moped, which catches them off guard, and this is where the sheriff gets attacked and Nancy runs to hide in that nearby garage. We also find out that the masked man that had passed by the window near the garage was Bobby. Bobby is visibly scared and he decides that he just wants to tell Nancy everything. His bike is randomly there, and so he just takes off his mask and takes his bike, and this is when we see him walking up to the diner and where Nancy drags him inside. And then we see the same scenes of everything that happened earlier unfold.
We go back to present time and Nancy runs away. Jake instructs Coop to follow her. so he and Bobby can take Petey inside. Jake and Bobby brings Petey inside as he's bleeding out. Bobby sees a pair of keys on the counter and he sneakily takes it. Jake asks Bobby how Nancy was in bed before he goes and kill her. This angers Bobby and he turns around and hits Jake with the napkin dispenser. We see in Jake's truck that Nancy's dad is trying to call him. He leaves a voicemail telling Jake that despite Nancy's decision, Jake will always have a job at the diner.
You should have just waited.
I know.
Instead of causing all of this.
Meanwhile, Coop sees Nancy and goes to follow her. Little does he know that Nancy has set up a trap for him. As he's running towards her, she pushes a cart to him and he falls on top of a hot stove top. She then hits him with the tray, knocking him unconscious. The scene goes back to Bobby and Jake and we see Bobby laying on the floor in a pool of his own blood. Jake walks off to go find Nancy, but he hears music playing from the jukebox. Starts slamming it, trying to turn it off. We see Nancy under the kitchen counter crying as she sees Bobby laying on the floor. He slowly slides the keys over to Nancy as he succumbs to his death. Sorry, Bobby.
She begins to slowly crawl towards Bobby, but this is when Tabitha finally makes it to the diner. She enters calling out for Nancy, but she sees Bobby's dead body on the floor and all the blood, and she screams, running out, saying she's not going to deal with this. At the same time, Nancy gets up and starts running in the other direction, and Jake follows her. They run down into the basement, and Nancy hides somewhere, nowhere to be seen, as Jake is looking around, calling out for her. She suddenly appears behind him and stabs him in the back. She actually makes it out the front entrance, but Jake catches up to her and stabs her in the back and pulls her back into the diner where she falls onto the floor. He stabs her another time in the stomach and leaves the knife literally impaled in her. He sticks a sticker that they usually use for takeout onto her shoulder and leaves. She's laying on the floor bleeding as he makes it to his truck and drives off. He then makes a 911 call, and we realize this is the 911 call that we heard earlier in the very beginning of the movie. He then does more drugs, but somehow manages to make it home. It goes back to the diner where we see Nancy actually take the knife out of her stomach. She's still alive and she slowly gets up, and we see her take some things out from under her uniform. She had actually taped some meat patties around her for protection, and this had actually saved her. She then crawls over to Bobby's body and tells him that she did have a good time with him before she takes the keys and makes her way to the police car. It then cuts back to Jake's house. We see that he's stumbling around, showing how unstable he is. We see Nancy pull up to his house outside. Inside, Jake starts packing his stuff, seemingly trying to run away after everything he had just caused. He then hears the doorbell start to ring. He looks outside the window, wondering who it could possibly be. The doorbell continues to ring, so he finally goes to the front door to see who it is. He opens it and see no one there, but on the doorbell is the sticker that he had placed on Nancy earlier. We see Nancy appear behind him, and she stabs him in the juncture between his neck and his shoulder, fatally wounding him. He falls onto the ground. She pulls the knife down, wounding him deeper. He clutches onto his neck as she limps away.
We see her walk down the road and she goes to lay in a grassy area. And she thinks back to the conversation she had with Tabitha earlier. She asks Tabitha if she ever feels like she's living someone else's life. She feels really lost in her life and everyone is moving on, including her dad. In the present time, tears roll down her face as she's accepting her fate. But from afar, we see a car stopping and her dad comes out running towards her. He holds her and comforts her, telling her that everything will be okay. She struggles to speak but manages to say, "My baby," letting her dad know that she is pregnant. That is the end of Last Straw. What did you think about this movie?
I think it was an okay movie. I liked how it was fast-paced, and I also liked the plot twist. I really thought it was the teenagers, but it was actually her co-workers.
Yeah.
I have thoughts on the co-workers. They're such losers. But anyways, yeah, but I wouldn't say it's the best. I mean, it's just a fun, quick watch. But if you're looking for something with more like deeper meaning, or I don't know, like more instance, maybe this might not be for you, but yeah, it was okay.
Yeah, I agree. I do like the plot twist of the co-workers terrorizing her, and Nancy is just a really relatable main character because I would act the same way she does. I hope you guys enjoyed our little recap. This is our first time doing this, so sorry in advance.
Give us some grace, please.
Yes, but
yeah. Let us know in the comments if you would watch this movie. Thank you for watching. Bye.